Hello, my name is Owen, and welcome to a quick review of Their Vicious Games by Joelle, Wellington. What I want to do is give a brief overview of the book's about, tell you the things that I liked, and tell you the things that I didn't like, and jumping straight into it. I'll make this overview very brief. Our main character is Adina Walker. She goes to a private school for the rich, the snobby, the white elite. Adina is not white, nor is she rich. She goes there because her parents work there. But nevertheless, she's very intelligent, so she gets into Yale. But after an argument with a classmate, her offer gets rescinded from Yale. But she receives a mysterious invitation to a game called The Finish. If you win the finish, this competition between young girls, you win the approval of the Remington family, and she's trying to win their approval in hopes that they get her back into Yale. It's a very vague, mysterious game, but she knows it exists, and she manages to get an invitation. However, this is a thriller book, and the thrills commence when she realizes the game perhaps isn't as simple as it seems at first, or isn't as innocent as it seems at first, and the thrills commence. Overall, I'm not going to spoil the book because it's a thriller. I'll let you figure it out on your lonesome perhaps as well. But overall, I thought this was a fun read. And going into things that I liked, I think fun is a perfect way to describe this book. It's very, very fast-paced. It's around 400 pages, or at least the version I read on my Kindle was 400 pages. It's a very quick 400, even at that. And there are some downsides to that. I wouldn't say it's like something I didn't like about the book, but there are some things like you want more or want to be expanded a little bit. You want it to be a little bit longer. It's just not that kind of book. And in terms of the characters, also because of the length and because of the pace, these aren't the most three-dimensional characters of all time. They're not the deepest characters of all time. A lot of these characters, especially like the girls in the competition, some of the Remington family, some of the males in the Remington family especially, they're kind of one note, but they play their notes very well, if that makes sense. Adina is kind of a great, I wouldn't say she's as bland as a blank slate protagonist that you project yourself onto, but as someone who's not in this high society, she's a great protagonist to latch onto. I thought she was a very nice protagonist to latch yourself onto, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But all the characters, they play their roles well, and I think the characters that do get three-dimensional, I think are interesting that way. Most interestingly, perhaps, Penn, Pierce's girlfriend, who is trying to compete in this competition, and then also the leader of the games. I'm blanking on her name right now, but the other Remington, the one who won the finish back in her day. I think those two are very interesting characters, and like I said, with that coupled with being Adina being such a sympathetic protagonist, the character work completely fine with. And it's fun. I think the setup of the book is fun. I think the twist about what the game is interesting, and how that kind of plays into the themes that the author is going for, because this very much plays into like a class commentary, race commentary, and then even like a feminist commentary in some points, because these patriarchs of the Remington family have this control over these women, and I liked how these characters, specifically the three that I mentioned, how they internalize that and how they react differently, because there's not a lot of, in this competition for the Remington's approval, there's not a lot of characters who are like, I'm evil, I'm just going to fight for the men's approval. There is some of that, but all of the characters I mentioned, even if they're not totally aligned with our protagonist, they are trying to fight against this like you think a normal person would. But the way they fight against it, their ideologies are all slightly different. So it's kind of like, specifically with Penn, Adina, and the game master, the way that they go about their goals are conflicting, but they're also aligned in some ways. I think makes some interesting character dynamics, and I liked how that played out, especially in terms of what the author was trying to say, like with this commentary. And one of the things I did like about Adina as well is she is a good protagonist, and sometimes authors nowadays, they always like to do the morally gray protagonist. They like to do like the not afraid to get down and dirty. And I liked how the author kept Adina clean a lot of ways. Not that she doesn't have to make some hard decisions, and especially in this, as spoiler alert, how bloody this competition gets. The author kind of keeps her pure in some ways, and lets her, whether by luck or by other characters' interventions, they kind of keep her out of getting dirty, of like corrupting herself, which is another point of the book as well. Like, it's part of the plot that's the case. But I also just enjoy when authors like keep the protagonist good in that way, because this is one of those books where like it is a fun read. It is like a not super deep read, but it's one of those books where like, you finish it, it's like there's no way the protagonist gets out of that story of that book and is not like mentally traumatized for life. So I appreciate the things that happen, without getting into specifics, what happens to this character, what they're able to avoid doing at the end of the book kind of helps me rationalize that a little bit more in my head. It's a small thing, but I appreciated it. But kind of on the flip side of that, going into things that I didn't like, it's not a super deep book, but the author does occasionally try to like really like ham-fist the commentary down. There's some lines in there, it's like, you know, they're writing it like, this is a banger line. This is going to make like quote books for centuries. And it's like, not that kind of book. For the most part, I think you knew that, but for sometimes the lines you write, I'm like, okay, it's not really working for me. And overall, I think this book could have done with a little bit more camp, to be honest. Not something I always say, but it is a silly concept, this fighting for this family's approval, the things that they make them do. It is a little bit silly, right? And not saying it should have been a commentary, but I think we could have played up the ridiculousness a little bit more, rather than sometimes reverting to a little bit more serious take on it when the whole situation is not that serious. And the whole thing in general, like the whole competition to finish, it's like a mixture of Hunger Games and like, it also reminded me of like the Tri-Wizard Tournament, which the way some of these games are played out. So it's a little bit silly. And like I said, it's not a commentary. There's not like funny things that happen in this book, but it could have been a little bit more camp. That's all I'll say with that. But it was still very fun. And also the moments where the author's trying to say something very deep, it wasn't like detracting. It wasn't something that I actively disliked about the book. It's just something that like I clocked. I'm like, you thought that was a really good line, didn't you? And then I keep going. It just kind of ruins your pace a little bit, right? And then the only other major thing that I didn't love about this book was how the game itself was paced out. I liked the fast pace. I like how quickly it went. There was never a dull moment in the book, which I appreciated, especially with like there was constant twists or evolutions to the game or to the story or to the character motivations that always kept it feeling fresh. But the actual like stages of the competition itself, like the trials of the competition, it felt like a lot of times there was a lot of build up to it. Like, oh, it's the ride portion. You got to train for the ride. The ride happens and it's over in like 3 to 5 pages, and not too much happens. It's over like that. And so there's not really, you don't get to immerse yourself in the fun and games for these early competitions, because towards the end, as the book kind of, or the game rather, not the book, the game kind of falls apart as these girls start to adapt to the situation without being more specific. That's where you kind of expect the games to fall apart. But when we're deep in the meat of the story, where they're doing these wacky competitions to get the Remingtons' approval, I want that expand a little bit. And then maybe that's the part where you can add a little bit more camp to it, like the ridiculousness of these girls like fighting bloody tooth and nail to get these guys' approval. I think during the competition itself, we could have spent a little bit more time in it. We could have made that a bigger portion of the book, that's just my personal opinion, right? The premise of this book is that these girls are in this ridiculous competition. The actual competing is not a huge portion of this book, and we do spend a lot of time with them decompressing afterwards in perfectly fine scenes. The competition itself, I feel like it could have been expanded a little bit, but overall, those are all the major thoughts I had. It's just a fun read. It's not going to blow your mind. It's not going to change your life. But if you're looking for a quick thriller, one to read with your friends and be like, oh, I wonder where this is going. I wonder who's going to win or who's going to betray who. It's that kind of book. It's the kind of book that I think benefits from a group read, from like a theorizing type thing, because your theories and you're talking about it will elevate the book to a level where maybe it's not that great, right? But it's fun, and I enjoyed reading it, but it's really nothing to write home about, to be honest with you. But it was good. It was good. And overall, I would say it was more good than it was even fine. You know what I mean? So I enjoyed it. Like I said in the beginning, fun read. Fun read, and you know what? Sometimes fun read is all you need. A fun read is all you need. And that's a rhyme, and we're out of time. Be sure to like and subscribe if you like the video and you want to see more rapping in the future. Coming out with an album shortly as well. Thanks for sticking around.